Ladies and gentlemen, with the investment opportunity of a lifetime quickly approaching, I want to discuss in this video whether or not it makes sense to potentially consider swapping Pulse Chain for PulseX or the other way around. I also want to kind of talk about my personal pre-launch and post-launch strategies in regards to capitalizing on the potential that this launch has with Pulse Chain and PulseX. So if that sounds interesting to you, do me and you a favor, like and subscribe, hit that bell icon to be notified of new uploads. For God's sakes, do it. That way I feel like I don't have to keep saying it. And without further ado, let's delve into it. So folks, with the kind of growth that we've seen with Ethereum competitors over the years, we've seen hundreds of X, we've seen thousands of X growth. I'm certainly excited and very much so interested in accumulating a lot more Pulse Chain, very similar to you. But the question is, does it make sense to swap PulseX for Pulse Chain? I know a lot of people missed out on the Pulse Chain sacrifice phase and got in heavier into the PulseX sacrifice phase. And so I'm asking y'all, who in our audience in this Twitter poll is interested in doing any kind of swapping? Nearly 9% of you guys said you might consider swapping Pulse for PulseX. Nearly 20% of you guys said you would consider swapping PulseX for Pulse Chain, and nearly 70% of our audience doesn't want to do any swapping. Now, folks, I'm feeling a little bit proud about this poll because I think that 70% there probably has a very good reason as to why it might not make sense to do any kind of swapping. Because here's what you got to understand, folks. There's likely to be a 1 or 2 day buffer period before the bridge to the Ethereum side is fully built out and functioning. And so in the early days, when this thing goes live, initially there's going to be a lot of ratio swapping, not necessarily price swapping. So you'll be able to swap, let's say, Pulse Chain for PulseX at either a 1-to-1, a 1-to-3, a 1-to-5 ratio. And folks, something you gotta understand is, if you're not swapping on anything other than a 1-to-1 ratio, let's say if you're swapping PulseX to Pulse Chain because you want to accumulate more Pulse Chain at a 1-to-2 ratio, you're essentially saying that I believe that Pulse Chain will outperform something like PulseX over the long term. And I don't know about y'all, but even though I like Pulse Chain quite a lot and it does have very bullish tokenomics, I think that PulseX's tokenomics are even a little bit superior because PulseX has that constant buy pressure with the buy and burn and a very good excuse to never sell it, because if you ever want to extract profits out of your sacrifice with Pulse Chain, you gotta either stake Pulse Chain and earn 2-3% a year and sell the Pulse Chain token. But with PulseX, you can stake PulseX and earn the third inflationary token and sell that thing, thus removing a lot of sell pressure from the PulseX token itself. So there is a case to be made that PulseX could even outperform Pulse Chain over the long term. So folks, in my opinion, it really does not make sense to be swapping Pulse Chain for PulseX or PulseX for Pulse Chain at anything other than a 1-to-1 ratio. Because if you're doing a swap at a 1-to-2, a 1-to-3, a 1-to-5 ratio, you're essentially making a bet saying that I think the other coin will outperform by a lot forever, which is uncertain. I mean, if we take a look at other kind of correlated ecosystems, we're taking a look at a BNB here to PancakeSwap, we can see that the two coins move extremely similarly. These are two correlated assets. I wouldn't be surprised if we see kind of a similar price structure with Pulse Chain to PulseX. The two assets are very likely to be correlated with each other. And so because these two assets are correlated, and because there is a strong thesis that over time, as volume builds up on the PulseX DEX and there's more buy and burn function, that PulseX could even outperform Pulse Chain one day. So if you're trying to accumulate more Pulse Chain, what I'm personally going to be doing is staking PulseX and use those staking rewards to buy more Pulse Chain and not swap PulseX for Pulse Chain. Because if you're getting anything other than a 1-to-1 ratio, you're essentially betting that the other will outperform forever, which is highly dubious. In fact, folks, if I see any kind of crazy ratio, like anything past a 1-to-3 ratio, 1-to-5 plus, I might even swap some Pulse Chain for PulseX if the dichotomy between the ratio is that extreme. If we're getting 5 PulseX for every 1 Pulse Chain, I might consider swapping some Pulse Chain for PulseX, even though I personally went far heavier into PulseX than I did Pulse Chain, because I think that it's logical to assume, since these assets will be paired together liquidity wise, that they're very likely to move in a correlated fashion, and they're very likely to have similar return on investment. So in my opinion, folks, I don't think it makes sense to gamble on who will outperform who. In my opinion, it makes far more sense, and it's a much safer strategy to simply stake your PulseX, use those staking rewards to buy more Pulse Chain and buy more Hex. That's what I'm doing, not financial advice. Now again, with Pulse Chain coming out any week now, the snapshot is also likely to happen in the near future. We don't know when. We're hopefully likely to get a couple days heads up. We don't know for sure if we'll get that, but in preparation for that snapshot, folks, I am moving all my non-ERC20s. Like if I have any Cardano, Solana, Dogecoin, if it's not an ERC20, I'm moving it into an ERC20 to capitalize on that snapshot, because any ERC20 you have in a private wallet basically means your MetaMask, your Ledger, your Trezor will be copied onto the Pulse Chain, which is a super easy way to 2x the amount of cryptocurrency you hold. Now, we don't know what kind of value you'll be able to extract out of those cryptocurrencies on Pulse Chain, but they're very likely to have some kind of value. Now, what I'm doing is making sure that I have plenty of Hex, USDC, and USDT somewhat in that order ready to go for that snapshot. I'm personally aiming for kind of a 60% Hex, 40% stablecoin mix, but could it make sense to hold some Chainlink in there, some Shiba? If you have it, I guess so. Now, once Pulse Chain goes live, I plan on selling all those PRC20 copies over the course of a day or two for Pulse Chain. Much better way of looking to accumulate more Pulse Chain than selling your PulseX, in my opinion, not financial advice. And once the Ethereum bridge is live, bridge over my remaining dry powder from the Ethereum side, and over the course of a week, slowly dollar cost average my way into Pulse Chain. And then at that point, folks, it's as simple as stake and chill. I would be very wary about providing liquidity to any pair that isn't correlated together, because especially early on, when these cryptocurrencies are most volatile, the risk of impermanent loss is the greatest. So if you don't know what you're doing when it comes to liquidity providing, in my opinion, I would personally avoid providing liquidity, because there's great risk to providing liquidity if you don't know what you're doing. For example, if you look at the Pulse Chain to USDC pair here, we see that it's paying a much higher APR than PulseX to Pulse Chain. Now, why is that? Well, sure, there's less people providing liquidity on this pair, but there's also much greater risk in this pair, because USDC is a stablecoin. It doesn't move, and it's paired to Pulse Chain, a cryptocurrency that's likely to do hundreds of X, if not thousands of X in the coming years, which exposes you to a great degree of impermanent loss. And for those of you who don't know, all impermanent loss is that when you provide liquidity, you provide two sides of a pair. When you go to withdraw, whatever paired moved the most, you get less of that pair back. So if you're providing liquidity for USDC to Pulse Chain is probably going to move a lot in the next year or two. And when you go to withdraw, you might get a lot less Pulse Chain back than you thought. So that's the risk of impermanent loss. Now, rather, if you provide liquidity for something like PulseX to Pulse Chain, which again there's a strong rationale to think that these cryptocurrencies might move in a correlated fashion, then the risk of impermanent loss is lesser. And so I personally would only provide liquidity to pairs that are likely to be correlated together. PulseX to Pulse Chain, eHex to pHex, or provide liquidity on my PRC20s, which I'm getting for free. For example, let's say there's a pHex to PUSDC pair. Well, I got those pairs for free, so I might choose to provide liquidity on that pair, because there's no risk on my side, because I got that for free. Hope that makes sense, ladies and gentlemen. Feel free to join our Discord. There's a link for that down in the description below. If you have any questions, I interact regularly with our Discord members. And I want to finish off by saying that, folks, look, cryptocurrency is a long game. To get that 100x, to get that 1000x, to get those life-changing gains, you truly have to hold for the long term. Now, people like to give kind of arbitrary price predictions and arbitrary time frames. The way I like to view things is, if we're talking about that 100x, that 1000x, that 10,000x, I personally like to correlate those kinds of price predictions with what's going on with Bitcoin, because whether we like it or not, Bitcoin going up introduces new buyers into this market with new and more buy pressure, and increases the potential pool of participants that could buy into Pulse Chain and affects their buying power. So if we are to do that 1000x, that 10,000x, my intuition would lead me to think that that would probably take until sometime into 2025, because the next Bitcoin halving is in 2024, and typically speaking, every single bull run in cryptocurrency in the past has happened roughly 1 year after the latest Bitcoin halving. So next Bitcoin halving 2024, next bull run 2025. If we're talking about 10,000x, my intuition tells me that's how long it's going to take before those kinds of numbers start to sound realistic, at least to me. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Like and subscribe. Until next time, take care.